In his latest video on Ein Noether and the conservation of energy, Veritasium wants to make us believe that a stone flying in space will stop on its own after a very long time.
Imagine you're an astronaut out drifting in deep space. When you throw a rock as hard as you can, what's going to happen to that rock? Well, you would think that it would continue with constant velocity in a straight line. That's just Newton's first law. But what actually happens is it eventually slows down and stops. So why does this happen? Where did all the rock's energy go?
This is wrong. The stone will become faster.
But as it travels through the expanding universe, it slows down and stops.
When I watched that, I was pretty surprised. I thought this is some bonkers nonsense. And I immediately wrote an email to Professor Jaron Lewis asking if he really was okay with the Veritasium statement saying that the stone would stop after millions of years. And Professor Jaron Lewis replied that yes, he insists the stone would indeed stop. However, he adjusted the term millions of years to billions of years. That was 2 weeks ago, and in the meantime I worked through all of the papers that they sent to me, and well, I can confirm that the way Veritasium told that story, it is actually bunk. However, the scientific papers behind that mechanism are accurate. So what's the trick in all this? Well, very simple. Veritasium gives us this perspective. He says, okay, an astronaut throws a stone and that stone flies away from the astronaut. And then it's kind of obvious that most of you, including me, were thinking, well, he also talks about cosmic expansion. The distance between the stone and the astronaut will get bigger, 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 and then the stone will accelerate due to dark energy at a certain point. And this is also correct. However, in cosmology, things are a bit different, and the entire trick is that you have to imagine a second astronaut that is standing somewhere behind here, maybe with a baseball mitt. I don't have one, but baseball season is starting again, and this second astronaut wants to catch that rock flying towards him. And since that second astronaut is also very far away from that astronaut that throws, so we can call them the pitcher and the catcher, this catcher astronaut will also be moved away by the cosmic expansion, by dark energy, just as the stone. Now let's watch this from the side. My index finger is the pitcher. So the pitcher pinches that stone and they both drift apart, right? And now let's forget about the pitcher. My left index finger is now the catcher. So here we have the pitcher, here we have the stone, and here we have the catcher. Both of them are a big distance apart, enough that the catcher is moved away from the pitcher due to space expanding and dark energy. The pitcher throws the stone with a throwing velocity of, let's say, 35 meters per second, and they both drift apart. Then the stone is flying in space towards the catcher, and the catcher also flies away from the pitcher due to space expanding. So they both fly away from the pitcher, and now there is a couple of constellations here. The first constellation is that the catcher is simply too far away from the stone, and the catcher is moved away faster from the stone, and the stone can never reach that catcher. Another scenario is that the catcher is very close to the pitcher, and in this case the stone will simply pass by the catcher. Yeah, now I guess most of you will know what I want to hint at here. There's a scenario where the pitcher is at the perfect distance from the catcher, and in this scenario the stone will fly at the perfect throwing velocity such that it reaches the catcher, and both of them align in that position, and the stone comes to rest just at the position of the catcher, and they both drift further outwards together due to the space expanding between the pitcher and the stone and the catcher. And in this constellation, the stone is at 0 velocity with the catcher. And this is a question that Gerard Lewis properly addressed in his scientific papers. Previously, I thought that the Noether theorem was mainly to explain why dark energy always grows. There's also a second main implication of the Noether theorem, and this is to explain where the linear energy of an object like a stone goes when it is thrown towards an observer or a catcher astronaut that is moving away from the stone. And now another thing that we could clarify is the terminology, because Gerard Lewis says the stone comes to rest with regards to the particles in the universe. Now in cosmology, a particle is not an elementary particle, a particle is a galaxy. And what Gerard Lewis actually wanted to say was that a stone comes to rest with regards to the galaxies in the universe moving away from that stone. Another detail is that the throwing speed of the stone thrown by the pitcher has a very specific name. This is the peculiar velocity. So this throwing speed that we assume as 35 meters per second is the peculiar velocity in the papers of Gerard Lewis. I will give you the links in the description. And the recessional velocity is the velocity increase due to the big space between the pitcher and the catcher expanding. Now, as a reminder, in the case of 1 megaparsec between the pitcher and the catcher, this is 70 kilometers per second per that 1 megaparsec. Was it really an Easter egg episode by Veritasium, just like last year with 37? Did Veritasium really not understand the cosmic redshift, right? If I throw this pale blue Veritasium egg out into space, then it's kind of obvious that at a certain point it would appear redshifted to me due to the space expanding between me and the egg. And I thought Veritasium actually wanted to make people believe that this pale blue egg thrown out into space at a certain point would turn violet due to the blue shift of that egg stopping on its own. Yeah, but now we know the simple trick to explain all this by simply imagining a catcher that is drifting away from the pitcher that is trying to catch that stone. Yeah, apparently Gerard and Derek thought that physicists around the world knew about Gerard's papers and they were completely familiar with Gerard's papers, but Gerard, you really have to tell people and teach people about what you found out. And why don't you make a video with Veritasium on that peculiar velocity and on the recessional velocity? So Veritasium, I challenge you and Gerard Lewis, why don't we do a video together? Fun fact before the end, did you know that Ein Stein in German means a stone? It's kind of obvious that as a native German, I just had to throw my 2 cents in here, setting the records straight. Yeah, that was it guys. Thanks for watching. See you in my next videos. Until then, bye.